I'm just going live right now, Michelle.
Will they be able to hear in the back?
Yeah, they're going to live stream. We're live
Or
streaming.
you live stream YouTube? Yeah. Let me know, inshallah.
Just make sure they're on.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم إنا نستهديك لأرشد أمرنا وزدنا علما ينفعنا وبعد. Firstly, I'd like to begin with saying that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this gathering of ours on a Saturday morning. You could have been doing other things, but your mahabbah and love for Allah, His Rasul, the Quran Kareem, the Sunnah of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for the knowledge of Deen. Our gathering here today is related to the ilm of the knowledge of our Deen, because it is the knowledge of our Deen which, one, as we will see, was one of the objectives of why Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was sent, and logically also what would separate one understanding, one ideology from the other. A huge part of that is the understanding of it, the worldview of it, and that is what ilm is. That is what knowledge is. As we mentioned last night as well, that ilm is actually nur from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah we'll try to keep this session a little more. We can have some questions in the middle as well, inshallah, as we'll give some break in the middle for some questions, and we can keep it somewhat interactive as well. So today's topic that we have in front of us, the history and development of fiqh. We can start off with the question to keep it somewhat interactive. That when you hear the word fiqh, what's something that comes to your mind? What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear fiqh? Anyone?
Halal and haram.
Halal and haram. Okay, very good.
Faquha.
Faquha. Very good. MashaAllah.
Hanafi is the best one.
Hanafi is the best. Okay. What else? That's not a bad answer, but anyone else? MashaAllah. Very good. Anyone else? How about names? Do any names come to mind when you hear fiqh? Very good, mashallah. So this is a right answer. It's not wrong, definitely. But what I want to point out is that fiqh doesn't start at Imam Abu Hanifa by any means. It doesn't start at Imam Shafi'i. It doesn't start at Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, or even those tabi'un before them, or even Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Right. So when we think of fiqh, then as our Hafidhullah said, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather He commands the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran Kareem and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and the word tafaqquh and fiqh, where fiqh comes from, that's actually mentioned in the Quran. So fiqh isn't something which develops later. As far as halal, haram, that's also correct, but the original meaning of fiqh, linguistically obviously means tafaqquh and a deep understanding, and the context that we're speaking about is a deep understanding of deen. Originally, fiqh was inclusive of everything that had to do with deen. Or as they would define it, مَعْرِفَةُ النَّفْسِ مَا لَهَا وَمَا عَلَيْهَا. معرفة النفس ما لها وما عليها. For a person to recognize what is beneficial for him and what is harmful for him. So that includes all of the major disciplines of your deen, whether it's aqidah, right? Whether it is, as we understand, specific masail and rulings on what is halal, what is haram, and including also what we call tazkiyatun nafs, the spiritual self. So fiqh in its essence and in its original meaning, in fact, it is inclusive of understanding of the entire deen. There's a book which is attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa. The name of this book is Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. So the word al-fiqh, we know what it means, and perhaps all of you know what akbar means as well. Al-Akbar meaning the big, right, the greater. So al-fiqh al-Akbar. So what do you think is discussed in that book? What are the contents of that book? Aqidah. That's right. So the genre or the subject matter of that book would be Aqidah. So he's calling it the major fiqh. But still calling it fiqh because that's part of understanding. So you're understanding, right, who you are in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is part of what we call, that is Aqidah, in other words. So two things we spoke about. One is that the meaning of fiqh, right, in its essence, in its original meaning, it's inclusive of practically everything that is related to your deen, whether it be aqidah, whether it be specific rulings and specific scenarios, or whether it has to do with the spiritual self. So this definition that we gave, ma'rifatun nafs, a person recognizing ma laha, what is beneficial for him. So what's halal? What am I allowed to do? That falls under that. What's beneficial from tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To recognize that what things I will do is good for my spiritual self. What things will harm it, right? Backbiting, using my tongue in the inappropriate manner, etc., etc. So this understanding would be inclusive of spiritual health as well. And the second is that fiqh, when we speak about it, and understanding of deen, that doesn't start, one generation after, doesn't start from the Sahaba or a generation after that, or even after that. Rather, it's from the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. So in a very, in Surah Tawbah, verse 122, the Quran Kareem addresses the Muslim community, the Sahaba anhum, primarily, directly, and then those to come thereafter as well, that وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً. Now, before we translate or speak anything about the ayah, I want you to understand and think about, as you know, mashallah, from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Surah Tawbah is Madani. Okay, keep this in mind. Surah Tawbah is a Madani surah. Makki Madani, the difference is that those ayat, or the majority of them, if they're revealed after any surah which is revealed after the hijrah, that would be called Madani as a term. Even if, for example, it actually happened in Mecca, right? So, for example, when they went for Hajj, etc., or they were revealed where Rasulullah was out in expeditions when he was traveling, as a major categorization, Mecca is pre-Hijrah and Madani is post-Hijrah. So Surah Tawbah is Madani. So now just think for a moment, I'll give some time, just think about this, that what was the situation, right? When there's Hijrah that occurs, and what do you know from the seerah? Is everything, all fine and lovely and everyone's hugging, and there's a very serious political situation there, right? This migration that occurs, the hijrah that occurs, this separates between Darul Kufr, Darul Islam. There's an establishment of a new power, to put in our terms. Obviously, the opponents are not very happy with this. So there's a huge political need at the time, which was also being addressed. So in this context, right, where Badr occurs, Uhud occurs, Ahzab occurs, Hudaybiyah had to have occurred, etc. And all of in this context, in Surah Tawbah, which comes a little later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the community of Muslims, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً, that it is not correct as the Muslim community that everyone engages in physical jihad at the time. Rather, there should also be a group of the Sahaba anhum, a group of the believers that dedicate themselves طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين. Now, those of you that have learned some Arabic, or even if you haven't, this is some very simple idea to understand that there are different words that are used, which will imply the same meaning but at different degrees, right? So let's take English for example. One is you say that you like something, right? That's one. Or let's start. You say you're okay with something. The higher degree may be that you say you like it, right? The other higher degree would be that you say you love it, right? And then whatever other you go on and on. It gives a similar meaning, but it's adding to it, right? So the word for understanding, or at least this particular word, faqquha, that's one degree. Faqquha in itself already means a deep understanding. When you put it on the tafa'ul scale and you say tafaqqahu, that means a very, very deep understanding. All right. So one is faham, understanding, then fiqh, right, higher than that, and then tafaqquh, the deepest possible, right, that you become involved and immersed in it. So the Quran is saying that in this political situation, this very real situation, right, the reason why I said is that we may have this very kind of Disney image almost of what the Sahaba anhum, what the prophetic time meant, that they're just sitting in the masjid, they're just only all day hadith and dhikr and Quran. No, there were real people with real situations that were facing them. Right? In that context, the reason why I'm stressing that is that we are also in a context, right? And yes, we also have the political front, and we also have a communal front, and et cetera, that are there. But the comparison that I'm drawing and what I'm drawing your attention towards is that this is an aspect of deen which the Quran is stressing, looking at the context, which can never be ignored. Right? This is an aspect of deen which is the depth and understanding of your deen, which can never be ignored, no matter how real, because it's in the context of Badr, it's in the context of Uhud, it's in the context of all of this happening, that this ayah is being revealed. So the Quran is saying لِيَتَّفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, right? Tafaqquh, a very deep understanding, which requires what? Dedication of whatever that needs to be invested, right? So part of whatever is invested, the number one thing is time. Number one thing that needs to be invested for anything to be successful is not money. It's the self, it's the person himself, it's his time. Then after that, whatever logistical things, including money, etc., that goes into play as well. So لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, that they themselves gain a very deep understanding of their deen, which includes the whole package. That means there has to be dedicated people. That has to be what they are doing. That means that another portion of the community there must be some type of support structure, right? In order for that to happen, which we will cover inshallah, that how the Ashab al-Sufa, the Sahaba anhum, there were those that were dedicated, and the others would pitch in and help them, etc. وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُمْ, and once they gain this depth and understanding of deen and they dedicate themselves, then their job is لِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُم. In that, literally meaning to warn, meaning teaching them, propagating that, passing it on. وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُم, that they do their job of teaching and passing it on. And what would be the benefit of that? Well, then those that are being told, they should accept that, right? So what's the point of teaching if there's no one to learn and accept that, right? So then it would just be a futile exercise that you go understand deen, you come back, you teach them, but they don't have to learn. So وَلِيُنذِرُوا قَوْمَهُم, that they warn their people or they teach their people. إِذَا رَجَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَحْذَرُونَ, so that they may take due care. Right? So again, we are coming from this aspect, fiqh and depth and understanding of deen. This obviously starts from the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran Kareem, the Sahaba anhum, and that brings it, that gets transmitted to those that come after that. Another ayah of the Quran Kareem, Surah Al-Imran, verse 79, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُونُوا رَبَّانِيِّينَ. كُونُوا رَبَّانِيِّينَ. Now, رَبَّانِيِّينَ comes from the word, as you can see, Rabb, right? People of Allah, people of the Lord. That's what it would literally mean. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, one of the greatest mufassirs, Sahabi radiallahu anhu, one of the most amount of tafasir come from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. He says, أي كونوا حكماء فقهاء. كونوا حكماء فقهاء. That be people of wisdom in deen, and fuqaha, those that have a deep understanding of their deen. كونوا حكماء فقهاء, those with wisdom and deep understanding. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in various ayat of the Quran, for example, Surah Al-Jumu'ah, the second verse of Surah Al-Jumu'ah, he highlights that why was the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent? Bi'athatul Rasul, the sending of the messenger. Why was Rasul sent? So, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم. He is the one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who sent from amongst the unlettered. Ummiyin, that's one tafsir, there are other tafsir as well. رسولا منهم, a messenger. So now here, what we call وظائف الرسول, the duty of the Rasul is being highlighted. يتلو عليهم آياته, that one he propagates and he recites the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of the Quran Kareem to them. ويزكيهم, and from tazkiyah, from reforming them, reforming their ways. And وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and teaching them the book and wisdom. And kitab referring to the Quran, al-hikmah, the sunnah of Rasulullah, the hadith of Rasulullah. So specific, after recitation and propagation and da'wah of the ayat, and after the tazkiyah and reformation of the self, in making that an active objective of the Rasulullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another objective is ta'limul kitab, right? So teaching. The point here, what's important to understand is that, again, looking at the context where the Sahaba anhum, they knew Arabic, right? The Quran Kareem was revealed in Arabic, and they linguistically understood whatever Rasulullah is telling them as well. Despite that, the Quran makes it a point and says, يُعَلِّمُهُمْ. You have to teach, not merely propagate them, because that's already included in يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. If it was sufficient for the ayah just to be told to them, that they just know the ayah, then there was no sense in يُعَلِّمُهُمْ الْكِتَابِ. So after propagating of the Quran, of the ayat of the Quran, يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابُ الْحِكْمَةِ, that he also teaches the Quran to them, right? Whether it be the correct recitation of it, or whether it be the ma'ani and the meanings of it, the tafsir of it, the depth in it, that what is the application of this ayah, how far does this ayah apply, etc., etc. Another hadith of Rasulullah, that Rasulullah he made dua for. We spoke about Abdullah bin Abbas, one of the greatest mufassirs. So he received a dua of Rasulullah, and he said, this is in Sahih Bukhari, Allahumma faqihhu fi d-din. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made dua for Ibn Abbas, and tells him that, may Allah grant him fiqh and deep understanding of this deen. Allahumma faqihhu fi d-din. So the summary of this section is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent his Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the task of preparing a group of men, a group of Sahaba radiallahu anhum, men and women. As we see, Aisha radiallahu anha, for example, she was from the greatest fuqaha of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, with the task of preparing a group of fuqaha, those that have a deep understanding of fiqh and of sharia, of Islam, and who are knowledgeable of the commands of sharia, right? So his his work wasn't merely to give the fiqh, or to just say and give rulings, but also at the same time to prepare the next generation, or prepare the next group who would be able to understand deen and then continue with that. Because Rasulullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know, stayed after prophecy for only 23 years. Right? Only 23 years after prophecy, at the age of 63-ish, around that, Rasulullah left this world. So now what would happen? What happens after the demise of Rasulullah? So it's important that we realize and we understand that part of his mission was preparing a jama'ah, a group that would continue with the same with the same teaching and learning that was going on during his time as well. Any questions thus far? We can stop for a minute. No? Great. So what's the prophetic methodology in implementing this reality that the Rasul will stay for a period of time in this world? But now we need to have those that will be able to continue the mission of teaching, because many, as we said, the amount of cases and scenarios that come up, those are unlimited. They change based on time, right? They change based on time. So how will the ruling be given? For example, there is just a very clear example. We all went through COVID, and there was a time, and I guess it is somewhat there as well, but in some regards that it's kind of done. In some regards, perhaps Dr. Saab may disagree or not, whatever. Hopefully it's done. But that kind of stage where there was this entire hype and scare, at least that is kind of behind us. So the natural question of vaccines, etc., that came up, which Dr. Yas also knows we worked on that. Now you can look through as many hadith as you want and ayat of the Quran. You won't find a direct ruling that you can or cannot take COVID vaccines, right? I'm sure that. Even if someone hasn't read the Quran or hasn't read every hadith from Rasulullah, obviously you would know that there's nothing directly that's going to be there that's going to say that can you or can you not take such and such vaccines, or can you eat such and such product, or in this case, how do I manage my salah, whatever it is, right? These various cases that come up, which may very well not be in the direct wording of the hadith or in the direct wording of the Quran. So tafqih and fiqh means exactly that taking and understanding Quran and Sunnah, the principles, the usul of it, the underpinnings of that, and applying it to these type of cases, right? What has not been what we call mamsus alayh, what is not spoken of in these texts, to be able to give the ruling on those in light of the Quran and Sunnah, right? So how did Rasulullah implement this? And what was his methodology in what we call tafqih? So the word here that we're focusing on is tafqih. Tafqih means to make fuqaha, right? So Rasulullah obviously had fuqaha and deep understanding, but it's not sufficient for him only to have the understanding himself. But now, once he will not be there, who will continue this? So part of his wadifa, part of his job and as the Prophet was to do tafqih, to pass on that understanding as well. So stage one obviously would be targhib, encouragement. Now this isn't chronological as such. I'm not saying that this first X years it was only this and then it was only that. But when looking at these various various hadith and various incidents which relate to this, you can put kind of come up with a convention of such, and that was perhaps followed in this, and you can put an order to them, or categorize them at least. So stage one would be targhib and encouragement, right? So if you're in a particular community and there's a novel idea, there's a novel field, the very first thing that you need to do is, so to say, sell the product. Right? The people need to understand, okay, why do I need this? Right? It's a very simple idea of, I guess, marketing. That why do I need this? Why is this important to me? So that's where targheeb and encouragement comes in, right? Not to say that this wasn't, that many Sahaba didn't kind of understand this, but to even reiterate that and to encourage them again, right? So the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we see the first ayat of the Quran al-Kareem that are revealed, as we all know, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق, right? Recite in the name of your Lord, the one who created. So iqra, so it's starting from qira. Now again, the context, remember the context being that we take writing and reading for granted. In those places, in Mecca at the time, that wasn't a norm. The norm wasn't that everyone went to school from the age of 4 or 5, and then they learned how to write, and then even cursive and all of these things. That's not what was the context, right? So recitation and reading would require that you would know that you went through some form of learning, right? Despite that, the Quran comes and says, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq," and recite in the name of your Lord, which includes that, right? There is tilawah, there is recitation. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be able to read it, the word itself in written form, but there's definitely an encouragement, and it does allude to that, right? So the ayah of the Quran, Iqra, that itself is an encouragement towards learning, towards understanding. Another hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Nabi alayhi salatu wasallam said that man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fi din. That whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends good for, then He gives him an understanding of the religion, right? So this is encouragement that, hey, understanding, gaining knowledge of your deen, this shows that Allah wants good for you. Man yuridillahu bihi khayran, whoever Allah intends good for. Another hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, نعم الرجل الرجل الفقيه. That how wonderful is the man who has فقيه في الدين, فقيه في الدين. إن استغني عنه إن احتيج إليه نفع الناس وإن استغني عنه أغنى نفسه. That if he is sought, if someone has a question, then he benefits others. Someone else may not know the answer to their particular case, but this man who has the knowledge of deen, he's able to benefit someone else. And when استغني عنه, if he's not needed, then at least أغنى نفسه, that he has benefited himself, he's made himself self-sufficient. That if he needs any, requires anything of in a scenario, in a case, what should I do as far as my deen is concerned? What is expected of me? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want of me? Then he's able to help himself at the very least. Another hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells the Sahaba anhum that indeed people will follow you, meaning the tabi'un will come and follow the companions. People will come to you from different parts of the globe to gain the understanding of the religion. So when they come to you, treat them with goodness. Istawsu bihim khayra. So this is a nasiha, it's an advice for all teachers of deen. That and the student comes to them, and they're only coming to you for the sake of knowledge, the sake of the understanding the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to learn the Quran, to learn the Sunnah, to learn the Hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then the prophetic advice to teachers of deen would be that treat them in the best manner. That just as you treat those who are beloved to you, and they become beloved to you as well. So treat them with goodness. Any questions thus far? So the first stage, as we said, was kind of setting the groundwork, encouraging the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, giving the fada'il, the virtues. And these are just examples. There's so many hadith on the fada'il, and the books written on the virtues of knowledge, etc., etc. These are just a couple examples that we mentioned here. Stage 2. So now once people are encouraged, they understand the importance of it. So now Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam starts his training, ta'aleem and tafqih. So the teaching and training commenced from the Meccan period, right? In Darul Arqam. Now, obviously, and again, remember the context over there, where Deen is kind of hush hush. Everything is whispers, right? You can't public display of. Obviously, that's the reason why no masjid was established. Right? Masjid is established only once there's hijrah, they go to Medina, etc. So the masjid is not established there. Obviously the haram is there, but that's under the Quraysh, right? The Meccans, the polytheists, the mushrikun over there. So the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Sahaba, they're not praying publicly. So they have Darul Arqam, the house of Arqam. That's where they're meeting, that's what they're discussing, that's what they're learning, that's where they're praying as well. So that started from the very early period, from the Meccan period. That also tells you what? The importance of knowledge, right? The importance of learning. So it wasn't immediately there weren't any, so to say, political movements that were made. Although someone may think that, hey, we're under oppression here, we're being suppressed, we're being sidelined, there's so much dhulm and injustice being done upon us. The first thing we should do, and the only thing perhaps, as some people would think, that we should have just a political agenda, and that's it. Rather, the Sahaba, they're coming and learning about their deen. Why? Because if you understand deen, then you'll understand how to do politics in the light of deen. Right? If you understand deen, you'll understand how to live your life in your profession as a Muslim. Right? But if those basics and those fundamentals are not there, you may engage in other activities, you may engage in other works, but that will not be in the light of Quran and Sunnah, right? So then that will defeat the point. That comes back to square one. Then what was the point of the Rasulullah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming to you? What was the point of Sharia being sent to you? What was the point of Islam and Deen coming to you? If you're going to do it in whichever way that you see fit. How do we understand this, or what's one example of this? There's the famous anecdote of Umar radiallahu anhu when he's going when he hears that his sister has accepted Islam, then he goes to her house and he intends to, when he comes to the house, he hears Quran being recited. When he goes in, the teacher, he hides and he sees that the Mus'haf is there. When he goes to touch the Mus'haf, his sister, now at the time obviously the Mus'haf wasn't completed, it was whichever ayat, whichever awraq, whichever pages were there, whichever amount of ayat that were written on it. When he goes to touch this, immediately his sister tells him that you can't touch it. إِنَّكَ رِجْسٌ وَإِنَّهُ لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ فَقُمْ فَاغْتَسِلْ وَتَوَضَّأْ. That you are not in the state of purity, you can't touch it. Either you go make ghusl and wudu and become pure, then you can come and touch it. So she knew, what am I pointing out here, is that she knew these ahkam. She knew the rulings when it came to the adab of the Quran al-Kareem, that what can a person do, and this was early on. This is in Mecca Mukarramah. Now that was Ta'lim Tafqih in Mecca, which began over there. Even Salah, how to perform Salah, this comes after Mi'raj, right? Because Mi'raj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the gift of Salah, which we discussed yesterday, the importance of Salah in Deen. And the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam coming and teaching Rasulullah Salah. When did that occur? That also occurred in Mecca Mukarramah, right? Before the Hijrah, before moving to Medina. Now after the migration, after the Hijrah, the first school or madrasa or maktab or institution, whatever you want to call it, that was established, it was in Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi, what we know as the Suffah. Even today, if you go to the Masjid Nabawi, you can see the Suffah that's over there. So this was basically a raised kind of platform, a place which was dedicated for the ta'lim and the teaching and learning purposes that were occurring in the Masjid al-Nabawi. One incident of this, the Anas radiallahu anhu, he says that one day Abu Talha, he came whilst Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was standing. He was teaching the students of Sufa. And this hadith over here, this incident also gives some detail about the kind of the social what was happening as far as the difficulty that they were going through. It says on his belly was a piece of stone to keep his back straight, right? Because it was out of hunger. They didn't have much to eat. This is early on. And he says, now despite that, يقيم به, he said, كان شغلهم تفهم الكتاب وتعلمه. That despite all of this, such situations, their occupation, شغلهم, the word شغل in Arabic is used for occupation, right? This is, if you say, ما شغلك, what's you say, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I'm a teacher, how we use the word occupation. So he's saying their occupation was تفهم الكتاب وتعلمه. That was their job. That was what they were dedicated to, learning and understanding the Quran Kareem. Another incident mentioned here from Sir A'lam al-Nubala. Sir A'lam al-Nubala is a book by Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah. Very beautiful, voluminous book where he has the biographies of Sahaba, of Tabi'un, of luminaries of Islam. Ibn Mas'ud radhiyallahu anhu, he was from amongst the students of Sufa. Other famous Sahaba which you heard of, Ibn Umar radhiyallahu anhu, Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, these were all students of the Sufa. So he was from amongst the students of Sufa, and he said when we would learn from the Prophet ﷺ 10 verses, so here he gives some insight into how they would learn. So he said they would take 10 verses at a time, right? So not only memorizing, but 10 verses, meaning whichever 10 were revealed by them. Again, the Quran is still being revealed. So 10 verses, learning the meaning of them, the understanding of these, recitation of them, committing it to memory, etc. He said we will not learn the next 10 verses until we knew the first. Okay, so the first stage is ta'lim, right? And kind of just passing on what is also already known. So if you just to kind of give a little context and make a comparison to our, into our context and how learning occurs here. In the initial stages of schooling, right, your child, or even not even just children, but for a good few number of years, there's no real research that the student does. Right? Elementary students aren't doing research, even junior high aren't really doing any research. Maybe towards the end of high school, etc., it starts. In the beginning, it's more of this kind of dictation, right? This is what you need. You get your basics down first. You don't start with debates, and you don't start with researching, right? Independent, and it's a lot of dictation, especially in the beginning. So the same or a similar idea was there. Specific to sisters, نعم النساء نساء الأنصار. Right? Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, excellent are the women of the Ansar. نعم النساء نساء الأنصار لا يمنعهن الحياء أن يتفقهن في الدين. Their shyness does not stop them from learning about their deen. They would come and ask questions about the deen. They would come and learn about their deen. Okay, so that was stage 2. Stage 1 we said targhib, encouragement. Right? Stage 1 was encouragement and targhib. Stage 2 we said was kind of dictation of it, the teaching aspect of it. Stage 3 is what we call tamrin wa tahqiq, so exercise, right? In this stage, the Rasulullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he taught the companions to recognize what we call nadha'ir, the term that's used is nadha'ir, nadhir, like scenarios, to analogize for future events. Okay, so through some examples, inshallah, this will make sense. So now, once a man came to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said that my mother vowed, she made a nadhar, a vow to perform Hajj, but has passed away. Right? As you know, if you make a vow for something, then you ought to fulfill that vow. So this person comes to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he says, that my mother vowed to perform Hajj, but has passed away. She's passed away. And she cannot do it. So what should I do? So now, one is that Rasulullah could have said, well, just do it. Right? That could be one, that wouldn't be a wrong answer. You could just say, if merely Rasulullah's job was only ta'aleem and tabligh, rather, only to pass over, that's it, the ruling itself, then he would have merely said, either you perform the Hajj or don't perform the yes or no answer, right? That's all he would have been. But he didn't do that. Rather, he gave her the reason, the understanding behind the answer as well. So to prepare them, to teach them how to think along these lines. So he says that he asks her a question. He says, tell me that if she were in debt, if there was a debt on her, would you have fulfilled it? Now, the person who he's asking, Rasulullah, he's asking him, to him this was intuitive. That obviously, if it's a debt, it's a financial issue, then I can fulfill it. So he says, yes, I would fulfill his debt on behalf of him. That's something I can do. So now the Prophet ﷺ, he explains to him, so fulfill the debt of Allah, meaning this nadhr was done of performing Hajj, and he passed away. So this is a debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He didn't perform this act which was supposed to be, or your mother wasn't able to perform it because she passed away. So it's like a debt, just as you have what we call daynul ibad, a debt on people, like that you have a dayn and debt that is left for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says that fulfill the debt of Allah, it is more rightful. It's more rightful that you fulfill the debt of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now over here you would have to stop and think though, and this is where the tafqih has to be in a guided light as well, right? The Hajj, there are different forms of ibadah, right? One categorization is a physical ibadah, merely physical ibadah, or majority of it is physical, for example, salah, and the other is a financial ibadah, which we know as zakah, right? Hajj is in between. There's a physical aspect of it, and there's a financial aspect of it. So those ibadat which have either are purely financial or have a component of money and finance, those another person can do on behalf of someone else. So Hajj, for example, you can go on behalf of someone else, Hajj badal. That's possible due to not being only a physical, but because there is a financial component to it as well. But praying salah on behalf of someone, that's not possible. Yes, you can pay some kafara on behalf of them, that's possible. But the physical act of salah itself, that cannot be done on behalf of someone else. Zakah can be given on behalf of someone else. It doesn't have to. You don't have to give it on behalf of someone. But you can. It's possible. Another example is that of Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is during fasting. So he comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and he says that, oh Rasulullah, I kissed my wife whilst I was fasting. Right. So now he is worried about what's the implication of this. Does this break my fast? Is there kafara? Is there no kafara? Is there expiation to this? Do I have to do qada of it? What happens then since I did this? So again, here the Messenger of Rasulullah, he could say it's broken, not broken, and that's it. Right? That could have been an answer, and that would just be tabligh of the hukum of the command itself. But Rasulullah, he makes him think about it and he gives him the understanding of it. And he says that what if you gargled whilst you were fasting, right? So he makes it synonymous that gargling to kissing, right? So you didn't take it in all the way. You didn't have a complete, you didn't satisfy that desire completely. So in the same way, merely kissing would not break the fast, but it's only a sexual act which would break the fast itself. Another point to keep in mind is that in this tafqih of deen and teaching and learning, the component of haya and modesty is that a person learns about their deen. Right? Shyness or haya should be from breaking the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shyness is not in learning about the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they may be somewhat of a sensitive nature. Okay? A person's shyness should stop him from breaking the command. You should be shy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, haya from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to break the command. Not shy in learning about what is right, what is wrong, even if he may have some level of social sensitivity to it. Another example, on the day of Ahzab was when the Confederates and all of the tribes around Arabia came and surrounded the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. This continued for many days, the siege. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahaba radiallahu anhum, after that, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Nusra and they had left, now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told the Sahaba radiallahu anhum that because the Banu Qurayza, that was one tribe of the Yahud over there, they broke the pact and they sided with decided against them. They were allies. They were supposed to be allies with the Sahaba anhum. They broke the pact and they also came to attack. So once that siege kind of was completed and it stopped, Rasulullah he said that we will go to Banu Qurayza to deal with them. So he tells the Sahaba anhum that no one should perform Asr Salah but in Banu Qurayza, meaning that go quickly and perform Salatul, make sure you get there. And you're there for Salatul Asr. No one should perform Asr, but in Banu Qurayza. So now Asr came in whilst they were still on their way, right? So one group of Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they said that we will not pray until we reach there, right? Because Rasulullah he said that only once you get to Banu Qurayza, then you will perform Salah there. Another group of Sahaba, they said that no, we will pray, because that was not his intent. He was just saying that go quickly so that you get there. He's not changing the timing of Salah. The Quran Al-Karim says, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. The Salah has stipulated times that it should be performed. So what he meant is that go quickly and perform Salah, make sure you're there for Salah. This was later mentioned to Rasulullah and he did not rebuke either group, because both of them had a particular valid form of thinking regarding this scenario. Now that doesn't mean that any time a person thinks that makes it valid, right? So that's another incident of Abu Sa'id who narrates that two men, they performed tayammum and prayed. Then they found water during the prayer time. So one of them made wudu and repeated his salah, and the other did not. Right? They both presented their case to Rasulullah, and he addressed the one who did not repeat his salah and said that you acted in accordance to the sunnah. And he said to the other, as for you, you should have the like of two prayers. Meaning, what you did as far as the ruling, the first person, what he did as far as the ruling is concerned, that's sufficient. That once you performed tayammum, salah with tayammum, but there was no water, that salah is done. You don't need to repeat that salah once you find water again. That is the ruling of the sunnah. The other person, out of his precaution, his understanding was otherwise, but Rasulullah he corrects it, but in a very gentle manner. Right? He doesn't tell him that you are wrong. What you did is completely wrong. It's false. It's against sunnah. No. He told him the answer itself shows that what he did wasn't necessary, wasn't part of the ruling. So he says that you should have the like of two prayers. I mean, the first, the fardh is already done. The salah is done. Now you performed wudu. The second one is just nafil for you. Right? That's enough of salah for you. You'll still get the reward of that. No one's saying you won't get the reward for that, but as your ruling, did that have to be done? No, that wasn't necessary. Amr ibn al-As, he says that I experienced a nocturnal mission on a cold night during the campaign of Salasil, and I feared that if I performed ghusl, that I would die. He wasn't in an Airbnb, he was in a hotel. They were outside, they're in Ghazwa, they're in jihad over there. So he sees that, this freezing night, if I'm going to use water, he says I would, death doesn't have to be literally death, but it would cause me, grave sickness. So I performed tayammum and led the morning prayer. The other Sahaba, they mentioned this to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Amr ibn As was from the commanders of Islam. Anyone knows what he conquest? Egypt. Very good, mashallah. Misr. So Amr ibn As, he was the Fatih of Misr. Later, this was mentioned to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam addressed him that, hey, is this what you did? So he replied, yes. And the Quran says that لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة, that do not throw yourselves into such things. ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما. So Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam just smiled, he laughed, and he didn't say anything to him, meaning that what he did wasn't wrong. Any questions thus far? So the third stage we did was that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he is showing this tamreen, this exercise to Sahaba anhum, making them think, showing them. Now the fourth is application of this. So now Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, during his lifetime, now he's seeing the Sahaba anhum applying it in his presence, or not even in his presence, and when he would send them away. So Amr ibn As, he says that two men came quarreling to the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Two men come quarreling to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they obviously are seeking whose judgment? That of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Amr ibn As says, I'm there. So Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he turns to me and says, okay, you judge between them. Now, natural question, why the Rasul of Allah is there, why is he telling Amr ibn As? Well, for the same reason, because tomorrow the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be there. So now he's seeing that, have I prepared this group or not? Are they prepared? At least in my presence, they will give judgment and I can correct that. If it's wrong, it's correct. Either confirm or correct that. Right? Similar to, is that how residency works? Something like that? If there's a senior surgeon there who has a junior with him as well, they'll see there that something, what he's doing, is there something to be corrected, is there not? So أن رجلين اختصما, they came and they quarreled, and Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam turns to Amr ibn As and says that you should judge between these two. Then he also, naturally, he is feeling shy. He says, O Messenger of Allah, how can I judge whilst you are present? So Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam encourages him. He says, of course, ijtahid. He says, in ijtahadta fa'asabta falaka 10 hasanat. If you apply yourself and are correct, you shall have 10 rewards. If not, you will have 1 reward. But for who? The one who went through that training. Right? The one who went through that training, for that person, the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you can judge. And then after that, at the end of the day, you are not ma'asum. You're not infallible. You're a human being. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. Right? The example is, if I put on a surgeon's clothing and I walk into the hospital with a mountain load of ikhlas, what's going to happen? Either shafahullah or rahimahullah. One of two things, right? Allah Ta'ala give the person shifa, or rahimahullah. Well, I may make it even worse. Why? Because I don't have the training for it. Now, someone who is trained, if they make a mistake, as long as it's not malpractice, etc., it can be overlooked. That it was just human error or something else happened. So in the same manner, if someone goes through the training, for example, Amr ibn As, and it wasn't every Sahaba. This is also important, that ulama, they have in their books, and they record that which Sahaba anhum were from the fuqaha of the Sahaba, which ones used to give fatwa at the time of Rasulullah after that. Every Sahabi wouldn't. Every Sahabi wouldn't judge. Right? Because as we see, the ayah says what? وَمَا كَمْ يَنْفِرُ كَافَةً. So a group of them, they dedicate themselves to this. Yes, every one of them knew their fard ayn. Every one of them knew what was necessary for themselves as far as their own deen. Right? But to make this the occupation, every Sahabi wasn't like that. In fact, many Sahaba at the time of Tabi'un, they would ask the Fuqaha of Tabi'un. The afdaliyah and virtue is one thing. That's something important to understand. Virtue is one thing, seniority is one thing. But if someone else who maybe junior has this particular training, then they would still ask them. That's part of their humility. That's part of their deen. In Tabaqat Ibn Sa'd, his Tabaqat is a very famous collection where that's one place where you can see many of these names of the Sahaba which ones used to give fatwa, etc. So he records Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. These were all from amongst, not the only ones, from amongst the Khulafa Arba'ah. They would all give fatwa during the Messenger's time. But here's the point. During the Messenger's time, why are they giving fatwa during the Messenger's time? The Messenger is still there. For the same reason, as we're saying, that a group needs to be prepared, and they would be, and they're exercising now in front of Rasulullah. Ali anhu, he narrates, as many of us know, that the Prophet ﷺ, he sent him to Yemen. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ sent him to Yemen. What does that mean? That he trusts him already. That this man that I have taught him, he has learned, he has the ability to judge. So he says, "O Messenger of Allah, you are sending me to a nation who have aged and experienced people." There were the Nasara, the many priests of the Christians were over there. So Ali anhu, being a young man, he was a little nervous, if you want to say, in the beginning. So he replied that indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala سَيُثَبِّتْ لِسَانَكَ وَيَهْدِي قَلْبَكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will settle your tongue on the truth and He will guide your heart. So the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So that's why, as you perhaps hear in many of the Jumu'ah khutbah, they say, أَقْضَاهُمْ عَلِي. You hear that in the khutbah? أَقْضَاهُمْ عَلِي. Yeah. Aqda means the one who was the best in judgment, from qada. Ali radiallahu anhu, he was one of the best judges amongst the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and forever in history, one of the best judges ever. Once, two women. So qada is one thing, and judgment and judging is actually a separate field from. Somewhat intertwined, but somewhat separate from halal and haram, right? From fiqh, if you want to call it. Once two women came quarreling to Ali anhu, and he says, and their case was each of them had a claim to a baby, right? One said, "This is my child," the other says, "This is my child." So there's no DNA testing, etc. Obviously over there. So Ali anhu, he says, "Okay, just leave this baby here," or he says, "Give me some time and then come back." When they come back, he says, "I thought about this." He said, "The best is we'll split this baby in half, give you half and give you half." The one woman, she says, "Okay, if that's your judgment." The other says, "Never. Give it to the other lady. I can't have that happen. It's not possible. What's going to happen to my child?" So he said, "Okay, this is hers. This is her baby." Obviously, the mother has the mahabbah and love for the child. Once two people came and they were quarreling over whose horse it is. One person, he comes riding the horse and says, the other person, he says, "No, this is my horse. He stole it from me." So he says, "Leave this horse over here. Come back." So the next day, he tells both of them that, "Okay, you call the horse." So the first person, he calls the one who came riding on it yesterday. He calls the horse doesn't answer. The second person, he tells him, "Call the horse." As soon as you call him, the horse answers. He comes to him. So there you go. That's the owner. Simple as that. Right? Qadar requires a little thinking, a little acumen. So there's many examples of this from Ali radiallahu anhu. Similarly, Mu'adh, he was also sent to Yemen. Both Ali and Mu'adh, both were sent to Yemen at the time of Rasulullah. And he asked him that, "How will you judge?" "Oh, Mu'adh, I'm sending you to Yemen. That what will be your policy of judging over there?" So he says that naturally, بِكِتَابِ first, أَقْضِي بِكِتَابِ the first I will judge based on whatever I see in the Quran Kareem. So if you don't find it in Kitabullah, then what? So then he says, then based upon the messenger, as how you have judged Rasulullah, he says, if you do not find that, then what we do? So he says, ajtahidu. Then I will apply myself in the light of Quran and Sunnah. I will give this judgment. Rasulullah he gives dua to him and he says, الذي وفق رسول الله بما يرضى رسول الله. Any questions thus far?
So there's a question online.
Yeah.
The question is, when Amr ibn As led a prayer in an impure state due to necessity, was this prayer valid or to be redone?
The prayer was valid because he was allowed to do tayammum over there. A mutayammim, someone who's performed tayammum, can lead people who have performed wudu. The question is, when Amr ibn As performed tayammum and then led the people, was that salah valid or not? So it's valid. The ruling is that mutayammim, someone who has tayammum, can lead someone who has performed wudu.
And so I have a kind of follow-up question. The ayah about وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ وَأَحْسِنُوا. Can you give examples where people may be misrepresenting or misapplying this, and what is the correct application of this ayah?
Abu Ayyub Ansari radhiyallahu anhu says the question is that وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ, that what is the context of the ayah, rather what's the true meaning of the ayah. Abu Ayyub Ansari radhiyallahu anhu, he was on a campaign since the time of the Tabi'un. So he's on a campaign with these Tabi'in. And once over there was a man. Now this is a ghazwa, it's a campaign. So one man, he goes and attacks the enemy front. Now I'm not saying this is and some those tabi'un around him, they say that لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. These tabi'un that say that how can this person do this? He's throwing himself into destruction. So Abu Ayyub Ansari, he turns to these tabi'un and he says that, do you know what this ayah means and when it was revealed and what was the context? That what it literally means that do not throw yourselves into destruction. So he says, Abu Ayyub says that, let me tell you. He says this ayah was revealed regarding us, the Ansar. He says that this was in this context when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started, the futuhat and conquest started, and some of the Ansari Sahaba, they thought to themselves, let's take a little break from all this work and let's kind of just sit back and tend, because they were farmers, they had orchards and farms. They said that let us, we did so much work for these years, and they did, definitely no one can deny the amount of nusrah and support. So they said, let's take a little backseat and some of the happiness and let these newbies do some work now. So the ayat to reveal, he says, that do not throw yourself into destruction. That you think that these few moments now that you've done, whatever work that you've done in these years, now you want to go back and only merely take a step back from all the work that you're doing for Islam and for Deen, and now you take a step back and you kind of relax and you of course they would be fulfilling their fara'id and whatnot. This is the destruction, he says, that is being spoken about. You're not being steadfast or not continuing and struggling for the sake of this deen of i'la kalimatillah. You see, this is what the ayah is speaking about. Someone who struggles in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way, someone who, whichever form that may be, that is not the tahluka, because that's not destruction. That you're getting Jannah through that. Difficulty, the mujahada, the struggle, whether it be time, finance, life, self, whatever it may be, all of that is not considered destruction. That's success for you. That's what is going to give you benefit in the hereafter. So, in other words, substituting the temporary worldly benefits for the everlasting benefits of the akhirah, that's the destruction that ayah is speaking No. Any other questions? The sister side in the back. You can ask me.
No, that's-
Ask me. How much time do we have?
45 minutes.
Okay. So now ijtihad in the era of the companions. So after the demise of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba anhum, this group of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that was prepared, their judgment, how did they, in the initial stages when Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed, when they were companions of anhum. So the very first, and one of the first questions that came up at the time, or there were two important, there were many important, but two immediate issues that came up. One was the janazah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Obviously that never occurred before. Other people passed away, but there was never a messenger, obviously. So how would the janazah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam be performed? And the second, the issue of khilafah, right? Who will become the khalifa? Other issues were there as well. For example, sending the army of Usama bin Zayd, should they be kept behind or should they be sent? Because Rasul said that they should be sent. Dealing with those who were denying the obligation of zakah, how should we deal with them? The issue of mutanabbi meaning people who false prophets, that started coming up. So there were many issues, but immediate, something that needs to be decided now, today. So amongst them, the two very prominent ones were the janazah of Rasulullah, the salatul janazah that we perform, and the issue of khilafah. Both of these, the Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, basically was settled by him or upon him. Right? So the janazah of Rasulullah, he says that I heard from Rasulullah that everyone will come and basically perform janazah. Their own salah, there's no jama'ah. Right? Jama'at and it's not that everyone comes and performs their own. The way how we perform it here, when someone passes away, they're in front, and then as a jama'ah, we perform salatul janazah, and that's how it would be performed. But for the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's for yourself, it's not for him. We're not making dua for him, it's for us. The dua is for us over here. So each sahabi would come by themselves, they would perform, and then they would leave. So that was one issue. The second was that of khilafah, yani who should be the khalifa. Now you have these great sahaba anhum, so many of them. So now Umar radiallahu anhu, now the way how he justifies it, that's what we want to highlight over here. So he tells the Sahaba anhum that look back to the days when Rasulullah was sick, shortly before passing away. For some time Rasulullah was sick, such that he was unable to lead the Sahaba anhum in prayer. He was unable to lead the Sahaba in jama'ah, in congregation in the masjid. Right? So who was appointed to perform the salahs? Who was the appointed imam, the Khalifa of Rasulullah over there for the salah? Anyone? Abu Bakr anhu, right? So Abu Bakr anhu, he was leading the Sahaba anhum for that period, for that time period. So Umar anhu, he says that the issue of khilafah, of political khilafah, imam al-khilafah, that is more of, that's a, so to say, a quote-unquote dunyawi, right? A worldly matter of political, which is important, very important. So he says that we who are being represented by Abu Bakr anhu, in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was happy that he would hand the affair of your deen over to Abu Bakr. Meaning, this shows the importance, as a side point, the importance of imam. And to choose the best imam, and what an important role it is, for the one who fills that space, who stands on the musalla and leads everyone. The reality is that this is the person who is representing you in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? For example, if you have a kind of a coalition of Muslims in Knoxville, and you appoint a representative, that this person will represent the Muslims of Knoxville in front of the governor of Tennessee, for example. Right? So there's something that needs to be represented by a Muslim community. We won't send like the kid, right? An immature kid there, and he'll just go over there and speak to him. Or we won't just pick any random person off the street and say that, hey, you can go and represent the Muslims of Knoxville or Muslims of Tennessee in front of the governor. Because you realize that how important this is. Okay? Your salah is being presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Malikul Muluk. You're picking who will be your representative in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, because him and the Sahaba understood this very clearly, that the position of the one who, that's why the Rasul of Allah, as long as he was alive and whenever he was there, which was most of the time except a few times, he would be leading the salah. Right? He, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, would be leading the salah. And the Sahaba wouldn't have it any other way as well. So Abu Bakr anhu, Umar anhu, he says that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was okay with Abu Bakr representing you in the salah in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this only works if you understand the importance of salah. Right? He's saying that this is such a momentous thing, that he represents your deen, the very thing the first thing that will be asked of you Yawm al-Qiyamah. The very first thing that will be asked of the person Yawm al-Qiyamah is an salah. He's saying that such an important thing. He was okay with Abu Bakr anhu leading you in this. So he said that amru dunyakum, that's definite. And he did have Abu Bakr anhu had the leadership qualities that were necessary for that as well. I'm not saying that everyone who is the most qualified for it will necessarily have the best leadership qualities in this as well. It's not necessary. He did have it. But look at the analogy that Umar makes. Right? So أَلَا تَرْضَوْنَ لِأَمْرِ دُنْيَاكُمْ بِمَنْ رَضِيَ بِهِ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ لِأَمْرِ دِينِكُمْ. Are you not pleased for your worldly matters with the one who the Messenger of Allah is pleased with your religious matters? So again, this is a type of analogy that he's making. Right? This is part of that tafqih that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he trained the Sahaba to think along these matters, along these lines. So now this continues. Sahaba, they have these discussions. Another important issue that came up during the time of Sahaba was the compilation of the Quran Kareem. The compilation of the Quran Kareem. There are various stages of that, but in this initial stage when this was brought up, then some of the Sahaba, for example, when Abu Bakr brought it to Umar, he said that why should we do something which the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself did not do? He brings it up to Zayd ibn Thabit, who was one of the main writers of the Wahi. There are many Kuttab al-Wahi, those that used to write Wahi. Zayd ibn Thabit was one of them. He was one of the most prominent ones. So when he was approached about this, he also expresses that we didn't have this official form of compilation. It was being compiled, it was being written. Everyone had their own scrolls, and everyone would. Sometimes they would write on, as it comes to Hadith, on bone. They didn't have paper that we would go to Walmart just buy paper. And that wasn't the case. So people would write on leather and different parchments. So you're seeing this official form of compilation that didn't occur at the time of Rasulullah. But then they thought about it and they discussed it, and then through various ayat, etc., then they came to this, that yes, definitely this is something which is in light of the Quran and Sunnah, as part of the hifz that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised, as part of protecting your deen and protecting the Quran Kareem. And there's even ishara, an indication towards this in the Quran. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ. The Quran refers to it as a kitab. So there is a concept of kitaba and ascribing it and transcribing it. So then what did the Sahaba radiallahu anhu do? Just as Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam trained them to be able to give fatwa and have understanding of deen, they did the same with the next generation of tabi'un. Right. So in Tabaqat ibn Sa'd, for example, Sa'id ibn Musayyib was one of the senior tabi'un. He records that كان سعيد بن مسيب يفتي وأصحاب الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم أحياء. Sa'id ibn Musayyib, he used to give fatwa and verdicts whilst the companions were alive. As we said earlier as well, that being a Sahabi, having the virtue of that, that's one thing, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that each of them had the training of giving fatwa, and not each and every one of them used to give fatwa. For example, the Qadi at the time from the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, very famous Qadi was Qadi Shuraih. Right? Now, Qadi Shuraih, and he was also the Qadi at the time of Ali radiallahu anhu. There's a very famous incident that Ali radiallahu anhu's position on one issue was one, and Qadi Shuraih was a tabi'i, his position was otherwise. Right? They differed on this. So when Ali radiallahu anhu as a Khalifa, the rule is that even the Khalifa, if he has someone raises a case against him, even the Khalifa comes to the Qadi, to the judge, and then the judge gives his verdict. So in that particular incident, it occurred between Ali radiallahu anhu and a Jewish man. So when Ali radiallahu anhu was called and he told him that, okay, bring your testimony and bring your witnesses, he brought his son and an attendant of his. Right? So Ali radiallahu anhu's position was that it would have been accepted, but the Qadi Shurayh's position is that a son and an attendant of a person, they can't serve as witnesses for the same person. So that's a unfair testimony. So the judgment was given against Ali radiallahu anhu over there. Yeah. So now that in itself there's so much to learn and take from that incident itself. The point over here being that these senior tabi'un whose fiqh was accepted even by the Sahaba anhum, even if the judgment was against them. Over here in this example, Ali was the Khalifa at the time. The judgment of Qadi Shuraih is being accepted against him. One of the most prominent Sahaba anhum in preparing other ulama and scholars and muftis, etc., and even qira'ah, etc., was Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. So the students of Ibn Mas'ud or Shuraih, Aswad, Alqamah, they would exercise ijtihad at the time of the Sahaba anhum without any criticism. No one would criticize that, hey, how come tabi'un are giving judgments whilst the Sahaba are still around? No one would criticize it because everyone understood that these are prepared by the Sahaba. Just as the Sahaba, as we learned, many of them would give judgments at the time of Rasul because he okayed them, right? That they were qualified, he graduated them, if you want to call it. So in the same manner, these tabi'un, they were also okayed by the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Shuraih, Aswad, Alqamah. Alqamah's name will come up again as well, inshallah. There were 7 famous ones, students of Abdullah bin Mas'ud. So Alqamah, Aswad, Masruq, Ubaidah, Abu Maysara, Amr bin Shurahbil, Harith ibn Qais. These are famous tabi'un who would give fatwa and give verdicts to people. Any question on this?
So the order of the Quran, for example, we have Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Baqarah. Why is it in this order created? For example, the first verse of the Quran,
yeah, that's a very good question. Now, why do we see that the tartib, the sequence of the Quran, the ayat of the Quran versus when they were revealed? So yes, the sequence of the Quran as it's recited from beginning to end is not the same sequence as it was revealed. The placement of the ayat were also from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he would call Sahaba the katibin of wahi, the writers, the scribes of the wahi. And when an ayah would be revealed, he would say that, place it between these two surahs, or place it in this surah, place it over here. That also comes from Rasulullah. So it's not latter day, it's from the time of Rasulullah that this would be Surah Fatiha would be the first. Should start. The Quran should start from here. The ayat are revealed more based on circumstances, as circumstances will come up. That's how the ayat would be revealed. But in reading in order from beginning to end, that is something we call tawqifi, which comes from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala Himself. That in this sequence, the Quran should be compiled and recited, and how the ayat would be placed. So it's from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala from the very beginning. Even tartiba in the sequence of the surahs, all of that's from that time. Anything else? There's a very interesting conversation that happens between Qabus ibn Abi Dhabian. He says, I asked my father, why do you leave the companions and you don't ask them the question, you go to Alqamah? So he says that I found many of the companions themselves asking Alqamah, asking verses of them. Because Abdullah bin Mas'ud in the next one, he says, ما أقرأ شيئا ولا أعلم إلا وعلقمة يقرأ ويعلمه. Mas'ud, he says that I trained the student of mine, Alqamah, to such an extent that he says that everything that I know, everything I recite, the way I recite, how I learned from Rasulullah, and everything I know, he knows as well. I've done everything I could to pass it on and teach him as well. So now, inshallah, we'll see a little bit of the academic demographics at the time. How and where did the Sahaba anhum spread? As we know, the Deen didn't stay in Medina. The knowledge of Quran Sunnah did not stay in Medina. Just as the Sahaba anhum spread out with Islam, like that, the knowledge of Deen and the knowledge of Quran and Sunnah, that spread also throughout the world and throughout the globe. So during the Khilafah of Umar, this is when the major spread of Islam started. Many different places, people of other tribes, of other ethnicities, backgrounds, nationalities, they started accepting Islam. So this calls, the natural call would be that we need to have people who would teach them. Even at the time of Rasulullah, when Rasulullah takes bay'ah from the Ansari Sahaba at the time of Hajj, before the migration, they say that, oh Rasulullah, send a teacher for us. Right? They say, send a teacher for us. So who does Rasulullah send? Mus'ab bin Umair, right? So Mus'ab bin Umair, because why? Anyone know why did he choose Mus'ab bin Umair? Is there any reason? No. Mus'ab bin Umair was a young Sahabi, and the people who came from Ansar were also men, were also young men, and they were young Sahaba anhum, so they would have a connection that they could relate more with them. So Mus'ab bin Umair was sent. Obviously, he had the appropriate knowledge for that, etc. as well. But amongst all of the Sahaba, why him? Well, one of the reasons was because he would be, he would kind of connect with them more because of their age, etc. So in Mecca Mukarramah, if you recall, we said that Mu'adh bin Jabal, he was sent to Yemen, right? So Mu'adh bin Jabal, he was sent to Yemen, but then he comes back. He's called back. And after Fathu Mecca, which is in which year of Hijrah? Fathu Mecca, the conquest of Mecca is in the 8th year of Hijrah. There, he is stationed by Rasulullah, right? So Mu'adh bin Jabal, he is stationed in Mecca now. So now the Sahaba and Rasulullah, the majority of Sahaba and Rasulullah, they go back to Medina Munawwara, and Mu'adh bin Jabal is left there in Mecca, right? And he's stationed over there by the Rasulullah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Mu'adh will stay there, he will judge, he will teach the people, etc. Mu'adh, he accepted Islam when he was at the age of 18, and he passed away 18 years after the Hijrah, which makes it about 8 years after the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Abbas anhu, he was 15 at the time of Rasul's demise. He narrated 1,660 hadith. Last night we mentioned the Ashab al-Uluf, the Mukthirun of the Sahaba who narrated more than 1,000 hadith. Anyone remember those names? The 7 Sahaba?
Abu Hurairah, Aisha, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Umar, Abu Sayyid al-Khudri, and Jabir Abdullah, and the similar.
The attendant of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very good, mashallah. So he passed away in 68 after Hijri in Ta'if. His famous students, Ibn Abbas' famous students was Mujahid. You see his name come up a lot in tafsir. Ata ibn Abi Rabah, and Ta'us. So this is kind of the demographic. Now again, this isn't by any means exhaustive. This is just some major names, some famous names. Just get somewhat of an idea of how the demographics, the academic demographics, what it kind of looked like. Medina Munawwara, the famous katib of Wahi, the scribe of the Wahi, Zayd ibn Thabit anhu himself, who was a Madani Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Umar anhu. These are all dates of when they passed away. And famous tabi'un who are there in Medina as their students, Sa'id al-Musayyib and Urwa bin Zubayr. Urwa bin Zubayr, radiallahu anhu, he is also how is he related to Aisha anha? Her nephew. Very good. Asma bint Abi Bakr is the sister of Aisha anha and Asma. These are the daughters of Abu Bakr anhu. So Asma bint Abi Bakr is married to Zubayr ibn Awam anhu, and Urwa bin Zubayr and Abdullah bin Zubayr. These are the 2 sons of Rasulullah Abu Bakr of Zubayr anhu. So Urwa is her. So what many narrations come from Aisha anha. The narrator from her would be her nephew Urwa bin Zubayr. And the son of Urwa, you have to know this name. If you don't know this name, I'm going to get very offended. Hisham bin Urwa. Yeah. Hisham bin Urwa. He's the son of Urwa bin Zubayr. In Kufa, so at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, he Kufa was Iraq, right? So Iraq is conquered at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, and he establishes a learning center in Kufa. And he sends a very interesting message to the people of Kufa, and he says that أثرتكم على نفسي بابن أم عبد. He tells the people of Kufa that I am giving you preference over myself by sending Ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu, to you. He says, I need him in my council in Medina more, and I have a very great need of him. He's a senior Sahabi from Fuqaha Sahaba. Rasulullah had a lot of what we call ihtimad upon him and reliance upon him. He says that sitting here in the capital in Medina, I am very much in need of his counsel. He says, I'm going to prefer you over myself and send Abdullah bin Mas'ud to you. So he sends Abdullah bin Mas'ud over there to Kufa. He's there from the time of the Khilafah of Umar, and later he stays there. He moves the Darul Khilafah, the capital, later to Kufa. So Kufa becomes an even more bustling, city. not just in the sense of trade, but in the sense of knowledge and ilm. 300 Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Books of history, Islamic history have that approximately 300 Sahaba radiallahu anhum were there in Kufa, in Iraq. Two famous cities of Iraq, Kufa and Basra. Ali radiallahu anhu, he was in Kufa as well. So once he moves the Darul Khilafah, during his Khilafah, when he moves the capital to Kufa, from Medina to Kufa for political reasons, many reasons are there. One reason might be that to keep keeping the what we call the taqdees of Medina is Medina. Politically shouldn't get involved in such things. That's one hikmah amongst other reasons. And as we said, Ibn Mas'ud, so now he has many students, Alqama, Aswad, Mas'ud. We mentioned the other ones before as well. In Basra, you have the famous Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu. In fact, his entire tribe, the Ash'ari tribe, were known for their knowledge and their dedication towards knowledge. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, so that's another city in Iraq. Basra is another famous Hassan Basri that you hear of, right? He's Basri from Basra. Anas ibn Malik, one of the Mukthirun, we said, narrated the attendant, the Khadim of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Abu Hassan al-Basri is over there, a famous student of Anas ibn Malik. And Muhammad bin Sirin. Ibn Sirin, the famous interpreter of dreams. Right? He wasn't just doing that, right? He was a muhaddith, he was faqih as well. In Sham, what we call present day the Levant, Syria, around Syria. So now Mu'adh, again he's sent over. So during the time of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, once he's sent to Yemen, after the conquest of Mecca, comes back up to Mecca, right? And then he's sent north to Sham again. Now this is during the Khilafah of Umar. Abu Darda who is over there as well, famous from the Qurra of Sahaba, Ubadah bin Samit, Makhul, Umar bin Abdul Aziz, Awza'i is a very famous faqih of Sham, Syria, Misr, Egypt, Yemen. Okay. Now we come down to the four Imams, right? So we spoke about everything for an hour and a half, hour 35. Now we're coming to the Tabi'un. So fiqh doesn't by any means start at the four Imams, right? That's, I wanted to stress that point, that it comes from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Sahaba anhum. The Tabi'un, senior Tabi'un came before the four Imams. And then they fill in the link, right? They're part of the link. That comes to us. So now Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, his name being Nu'man bin Thabit. Abu Hanifa was what we call his kunya. Nu'man bin Thabit, that's his name. His father is Thabit, his name is Nu'man. Born in the 80th year of Hijrah, and he's a tabi'i. He's considered to be a junior tabi'i. Right? Senior tabi'un, they, most, because 80th year of Hijrah, most of the Sahaba have passed away. There's a few of the younger Sahaba that who are alive, just a couple of them. So he's considered to be a junior tabi'i. And he passes away the 150th year after Hijrah. And 150 is the day birth of who? Anyone know? Which other Imam? Imam Shafi'i. The year which Abu Hanifa passed away is the same year Imam Shafi'i is born. So now this is important, right? Because we said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions, right? Tabi'un, senior tabi'un, right? And then coming down. So what is Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah's sanad of his knowledge, right? The chain, how is he connected to Rasulullah? His fiqh, because we said that fiqh comes from the Rasul of Allah. So anyone who comes after that, their fiqh has to match up with that, right? So from the Rasul sallallahu the Sahabi, one Sahabi, Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu, he was famous student, which we covered, was Alqama, amongst the many students. One famous one, the one we said, The incident was when the father was asked, hey, why do you ask Alqamah your fatwas and verdicts? So he says, I see the Sahaba asking them. And then Abdullah bin Mas'ud says that everything I كل ما أقرأ وكل ما أعلم, everything I recite, everything I know, وعلقمة يعلمه. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud, one of his famous students is Alqamah. His famous, now these aren't only one student, it's not his only student, these are just one of the many students. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, whose famous student is Hamad ibn Sulaiman, whose student is Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? So now, this would be because Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he's also in Kufa. Right? And Imam Abu Hanifa is also Iraqi, he's in Kufa as well. Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman is Kufi, Ibrahim Nakha'i is Kufi, Alqamah is Kufi, and Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he comes to Kufa from Medina Munawwarah. Another great Imam of the four Imam Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah, he's born 13 years after Imam Abu Hanifa, 93 Hijrah, and 179 he passes away. And obviously in Medina Munawwarah, very famous, this sanad in hadith always comes up as well. Malik an Nafi' an Ibn Umar. Imam Malik from Nafi' from Ibn Umar. Any questions? No. Absolutely.
Yes, for those who come into Islam later, and so like I've never known the differences in the four Imams, and so how does he important is it that I follow one versus just knowing a little about all of it?
And the best is that you seek knowledge from whoever is locally available to you, inshallah. Whatever is locally available to you, inshallah, you seek knowledge through that, those means, inshallah. Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, Muhammad bin Idris is the name of Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah. He's born in Gaza, Palestine. Now here, this is very important. Why I chose these two sanads is that you can see the connection amongst the Imam as well. So there isn't a contradiction per se. So look at the same sanad over here. You have Shafi'i and Malik and Nafi' and Ibn Umar. So one of the most important and prominent teachers of Imam Shafi'i was Imam Malik himself, right? Especially his sanad in Hadith that goes through Imam Malik. And then one of his most prominent teachers of fiqh was Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. Shafi'i, in fact, he says, I went to learn fiqh from the student of Abu Hanifa, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. So Shafi'i, see in this last, the second one, where you see Shafi'i at the end. So who does he learn from? Muhammad ibn Hassan. That's a student of Imam Abu Hanifa. Shafi'i, Muhammad Hassan, Abu Hanifa, going upwards as well. So the reason, now obviously he has many other sanid. The reason why I specifically put these two is to show that there's no, it's not a conflict. It's not a conflict of issues, but rather learning and teaching occurs like that. He was born in 150, as we said, the same year that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah passes, and he passed away 204 after Hijrah. Imam Shafi'i would be Tabi Tabi'i, not a Tabi'i, but after the Tabi Tabi'i. And you have Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah in Baghdad, 164 after Hijrah, after that. Before I move on to, I just want to cover one last section, but before, and very quickly, this last section, there is much more to this, but inshallah, I think this should be sufficient. If there's any question on whatever we've discussed thus far, then I'll just end in about 5 minutes, inshallah. 5 to 10 minutes. Anything in here?
Are you going to come next time?
Oh, it's a little more. 5 minutes.
I just have a closing question.
Closing question. Okay.
What are the main differences on these four methods or methods?
Yeah. So that's yeah. So in this, I do have an entire section on this, the role of hadith in academic differences. Let's see if we can maybe cover one or two of these.
We'll have to invite Mufti Hisham again.
This was actually, I mean, I'm just going through this really fast. I actually taught this as a semester course, like 15, 16 weeks or something. So inshallah, I'm just trying to get the main points in. Yeah. So the status of hadith, right? The role of hadith in these, obviously, as we know that there are some differences amongst the various a'immah. But this point I want to make very clear is the status of hadith, right? How important was hadith to each of these a'immah, right? So these quotes are there to show that differences are not based on how important you consider something to be, right? It's more of the approach and understanding of that. Okay, so the first quote, and I'm going in a chronological order. So Abu Hanifa rahimahullah first, قال الإمام أبو حنيفة لم تزل الناس في صلاح ما دام فيه من يطلب الحديث فإذا طلبوا العلم بلا حديث فسدوا. Okay, so Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, his a famous statement from him that people will continue to be upon righteousness في صلاح as long as there is someone amongst them who pursues hadith, the field of hadith. Once knowledge is sought without hadith, corruption will start. These statements from these aim are very important because often people may assume that, hey, such and such imam, he doesn't really know this hadith, or he doesn't give much attention to this. I find this hadith. That's not the case by any means. Each of them held hadith and this is just one out of many statements. Obviously, we can't quote that many statements over here in this session of ours, but just to give an idea of the status of hadith, how important was it to them, and in building of their fiqh and in the adoption of their positions. So every one of them held hadith at the highest standard. Quran, after the Quran al-Kareem, the Sunnah and the hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the idea is, how do you approach it, how do you understand it, how do you apply it, not in the very status of it. Okay. Malik bin Anas rahimahullah, Imam Malik, he says, as-sunanu safinatu Nuh. He says the sunan, the plural sunnah, the sunnah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're like the ship of Nuh alayhi salam. So what do we know about the ship of Nuh? That whoever got onto the ship was saved. Man rakibaha naja. And whoever did not get onto the ship, then وَأَنْ تَخَلَّفَ عَنْهَا غَرِقَ, they will be, whoever does not, they will be drowned. Imam Shafi'i, he says, أَيُّ أَرْضٍ تُقِلُّنِي إِذَا رَوَيْتُ عَنْ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم حديثا وقلت بغيره. Which land will carry me and allow me to stay on it? إِذَا رَوَيْتُ عَنْ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم حديثا وقلت بغيره. If I narrate a hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and I act and give a verdict contrary to it. So a very famous a principle that is discussed in Usul al-Hadith and the principles of Hadith. Now, this is just one principle. All of this comes together as an entire field that's studied. But just something which comes to mind that that's relevant over here. That one principle is that if a rawi, a narrator of a hadith, he acts contrary to it. So what do we take from that? What we take from that is that means he understands the hadith in a different light, or he knows that there's some level of weakness to that cannot be applied, or that's not upon its apparent meaning. Because especially when it comes to Sahabi, why would he say something and act contrary to that? Right? So no imam considering a hadith to be accepted ever acted or would ever act against it. It's always an understanding in light of other texts and other nusus that that they would adopt whatever position they would. And in this, there's rahmah. There's rahmah in this, and there's mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this. Imam Ahmad, he says, "Man radda hadith Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fahuwa ala shafa halaka." Whoever rejects the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning after being established, to reject the hadith as a hadith, which is a hadith, then that person is on the brink of destruction. I mean, there's nothing left for that person in his deen. Okay, since our brother here asked this, I'll just give really quickly, just go through just a couple of slides, inshallah. By no means is this covering by no means the depth of the field, all of the discussions before, prior, during, and after it, just to give a glimpse of it, inshallah. So, what are some differences in some conditions of the sihha of hadith? So, which hadith is considered to be acceptable, for example? So, here are 5 very broad and general conditions that are given. One is that the hadith should have an unbroken chain from the narrator. Let's just say, take Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, Imam Abu Dawood rahimahullah, any one of them. So they narrate from their teacher all the way up to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there should be an unbroken chain, meaning there should be no gaps. Okay, nothing there's missing. Each of them heard from the other one all the way to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's one condition. The righteousness of the narrator. He cannot be a transgressor. The memory of that narrator, what we call dhabit, how good does he retain? Does he learn? Does he retain? Not to be offensive, but just to put it in perspective, if we consider the rules that the muhaddithun have set for memory of the narrator, none of us in this room would qualify. Right? The conditions they put in, the level of memory that they're considering. Again, it's not to offend, I'm including myself. None of us perhaps would probably make it be accepted by them at that level.
What are some of those rules?
From the time you hear it till the time you narrate it, you cannot forget even a single letter, word, nothing of that. And it's not one. So if 100 of them, 1,000 of them, so you're not forgetting, for example.
But you can't even stutter.
So, as in, like, you have a problem, and that's a speech problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just the way you narrate it, you can't have a stutter when you're.
No, I mean, a stutter is more speech.
Oh.
Yeah, that's it. So then they have grades that and then they'll differentiate between that this shaykh, before they say the term that's used is ikhtilat. Right? So some of the shuyukh, once they became older, their memory started failing them a little bit. So they'll see that which students were qabla before this stage, which ones are after, and then differentiate between that. Not to completely reject it, but see, kind of weigh it. If there's any discrepancies, okay, what was it coming from here? Was it coming from there? It's an entire field, put it simply. The chain or text should be free of irregularities. So if you have, let's say, for example, 10 students of a shaykh and only one student is saying a set of wording that everyone else is saying otherwise, that brings a question. That's a red flag. So it's a question mark. Discrepancies, hidden discrepancies. So now, in the first point, here's just an example here. 2 books that, mashallah, we all know of, and we call them Sahih, right? The Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, the Sahih of Imam Muslim. But they both have, some degree of difference as to, in one condition called liqa. Liqa means meeting, right? So Imam Bukhari, he says that there has to be proof of physical meeting, that you have to have proof that, or at least for his Sahih itself. For his Sahih Bukhari, he says that I need to have proof that this narrator met that narrator. Okay. even once. And Imam Muslim, he says, well, a possible meeting, right? So if he said, to put into your context, that if you know that brother Abdullah and brother Zayd, they both lived in Knoxville at the same time, now that doesn't necessarily mean that they met, right? They could have met, they might not have met. I mean, if I ask, have you met every single person in Knoxville, every Muslim that's in Knoxville? No, but is there there's a possibility that you have met them. So he says that possibility is sufficient, if he's narrating from him, to say that, they've met. And Bukhari says, at least for his Sahih Bukhari, he says, I need to have proof that they met once.
What could be the proof is
Historical, that he learned hadith from him. So these are, in this example, it's obviously not meeting at a grocery store. That's not in this context. It's that such and such sheikh, he narrates hadith. So he attended his durus, or would he ever attend that or not? Then each of these conditions have more details. We'll stop here, inshallah. I don't want to open up discussions and then not be able to give due right to them as well, inshallah. I'll stop here, inshallah, and we'll open the floor for any questions, comments, inshallah.
Sab, is this the material and content for the Sheikh program? Or is this another course that you're teaching?
Shaykh al-Hind program, not so much. At least the first section, that's more historical. I can be any inshallah crowd. The details of all of this, the second section, that usually gets covered, not in this manner, but actually in more detail in the later, about third year forward, approximately. Merely from a historical perspective, somewhat, yes, we can do it earlier. But getting into the principles and stuff, second and third year, you could say. You could start from the second. So Shaykh al-Hind, first year, and the second, that would be our third year. And the third, fourth, and then moving on every year after that. You fit in different parts of the jigsaw puzzle. And inshallah, at some point, you get some form of understanding.
I do have a question. Does anyone else have?
Yeah.
How do you view the future of fiqh in America looking like, considering that, for example, I come from my family's Pakistan, everyone's Hanafi. And so you just have like one major school dominating the entire region. Whereas when you come to America, even within the city, you have people from all four schools of thought, as well as people who don't apply themselves to the school of thought. How do you envision fiqh looking like in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years?
That's a good question. Any other question? Maybe I'll tie it in with something.
Well, my question was kind of related to that. It was a statement that Sheikh Amin had made in the banquet there, where he said that the need of the hour today for Muslims in America is orthodoxy. So in the context of our discussion here, or I think more clearly, what is the definition of being an Orthodox Muslim versus a non-Orthodox Muslim? And in an insulated community, we're a small-town community. How does that, in the context that we live in, small town versus big town, and as the brother's saying, when you have all form of that here, then people are following everything. So I think that would be kind of an add-on to what Moaz is saying.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that, as I kind of mentioned, by the way, that to view fiqh, for what it is. So what is fiqh, or various fiqh? It's an understanding of the Quran and Sunnah, right? A particular approach to it. If it makes it easier for some of you to understand, even constitutional law over here, you have different approaches to them. Obviously, there's a major difference between fiqh versus approaches to constitutional law over here, which one is from wahy and revelation, the other is not. But the idea of approach is still there. There is a difference in approach. So to understand and to think of fiqh for what it is, That being an approach of understanding the Quran and Sunnah, which in fact is to understand what is muradullah, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want. That's the first step. Why is that important? Although it may sound like something obvious, but the way how many times it's treated, it doesn't seem that we are understanding it like that. Meaning to have the utmost level of what we call ihtiram, honor, and respect for that, which is that we don't make it an issue of differences. And so often what happens is that when you hear fiqh and different fiqh equals differences, equals conflict, equals, we cannot be united, etc., etc., etc. That's not the right trajectory. And that's not the right way of viewing fiqh to begin with. As you saw from Sahaba, and that was, as I said, one of the reasons why I even showed the sanad of these fuqaha, is that they're learning from each other. They're taking from one another. Right? It was never meant to be, and they have Sahaba who also had differences. The differences many of the differences that you see that are in different fiqhs, they're coming from the Sahaba. Right? And they seem to be doing very well in Medina and in the other places they went. And as an ummah, they were very much established. They were able to propagate and thrive, not just survive as a community, but thrive as a community. So I think the very first basis, the first point is to view fiqh as a ni'mah, right? Take it for what it is, understand it for what it is, whichever fiqh it may be. Where do I see it going? I think that's really up to us as a community, how much we want to invest into it, right? As I said that, and anything that you want to see flourish, it really depends how much you're going to invest in it. Starting with time, starting with dedicating human resources, right? Stuff, material, that's one thing. The most important investment is a human investment, right? If you don't have people running a multi-billion-dollar company, if you don't have people there, you don't have a multi-billion-dollar company, for example, right? If you have people, then these things will fall in place sooner or later. The same thing I see for fiqh and any other field, Islamic discipline for that matter, is that it really depends on us as a community. How much do we want to invest into this, right? If we take the prophetic method, the Sahaba, what they implemented is that they had dedicated people and they had a support structure around them, right? And then those individuals, they were allowed to practice their field in the way they understood it, right? So again, at least three things. One, investment of that human resource, right? Dedicating from ourselves. Two, the support structure for that, the allowance for that. And three, actually to benefit from that then. Not so if to take what they have to say and let them kind of do their job then after that. So as long as I think that kind of continues to happen, which in many places that does happen, and inshallah other places it's starting to happen, as long as this, and it doesn't matter to me if it's this fiqh or that fiqh, and as long as it's a correct method or all correct methods, or you can have multiple ones. It's nothing to me. Fiqh has never been a conflict, and whenever it was done correctly, it was never a conflict. In the Umayyads mosque of Sham, you had pillars for each fiqh. Medina Munawwara was like that for a long time. Each fiqh was being taught, and this was something that was considered to be the richness of our academic heritage. It was never meant to be, and never was. When it was practiced correctly, a means of difficulty and conflict and disunity. That's my small piece of how I see it. So as long as it's done correctly, it'll be great. As long as it is done first and done correctly, then inshallah I think there's great benefit. Again, understand it as this is to understand what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from us. If we look at it like that, then it's something that we naturally, as a Muslim, you would want to invest in, because you want to make sure that you're getting it right. And this is what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala wants from us at this time, at this point, in this case. So naturally, I'd like to invest into that.
What if someone say they're following Quran and Sunnah, but not a specific method?
Well, as I said, that these aren't contradictory and not, these aren't two contrary statements. So a fiqh simply means an approach to Quran and Sunnah. So either you'll have an approach which has been academically and rigorously, refined and been through and kind of a wheel that's been there, done that type of thing, or you're going to have your own approach to something.
It's okay to have your own approach, right?
If someone is qualified for that, and completely have their own, to have your, so now no one, even the Aimah that we discussed, no one has their own approach. They all studied from someone. Abu Hanifa, as you saw their sanad, he studied from someone who studied from someone who studied from someone. So as long as people are studying from others and they're taking that, so for example, Imam Tirmidhi, rahimahullah, in his Jami', after hadith, he mentions madhahib and positions. So often he says madhab ahli al-Kufa, the madhab of people of Kufa. So who's there? Everyone gets grouped in over there. Imam Hanifa, Sufyan al-Thawri, etc., etc. Madhab ahli al-Madina. So Imam Malik, others, they all get grouped in there. No one was ever accepted as a scholar in Islam except without a sanad, except without a chain. So if someone says, I have my own approach, and if that means that they're not taking from someone who has a sanad, then that is definitely not accepted. And you can say that for any field in this world as well. If someone says, I have my own approach to medicine, you're not going to get any job at a hospital, and no one's going to take you, right? Until you haven't studied medicine from someone, until it goes back. And that goes for any field, for the most part. Any field which has, a certain level of danger associated with it. Meaning, when it comes to medicine, it's the person's health that's in jeopardy, and when it comes to our deen, it's our iman that's at stake. Any other questions?
Just one last thing before we close your guys. Darul Qasim's investment in fiqh. My understanding is that we are not just teaching Hanafi, but we want to expand it to all forms of that. And what is our goal for each madhab? To what level are we achieving it in our investment as an institution?
Inshallah, this year, alhamdulillah, we added on the fiqh Shafi'i, and we have a Shafi'i teacher that's been onboarded. Sheikh Yaqub is there. Each fiqh, inshallah, we want to go all the way up to the Iftā level, the fatwa level, that when questions come in, if someone needs a fatwa from if they adhere to the Hanafi fiqh, they adhere to the Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, inshallah, that we'd be able to cater for that through one platform, inshallah. So the Shafi'i fiqh, alhamdulillah, has been on board this year. Hopefully you'll see more publicized classes for the Shafi'i fiqh, more formal. The condition is very, very simple for any, is that we need to have the qualified individuals for any of these fiqh. So alhamdulillah, we've onboarded a very good Shafi'i teacher, inshallah. We hope to continue this, and we wanted each of these, to go through their entire curriculum, and then all the way up to the Iftā level, being able to give that fatwa, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you. It's been a pleasure for me to meet you, and as I said yesterday as well, that we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this a means of finding a space under His arsh يوم القيامة. رجلان يتحابا في الله اجتمعا فيه وتفرقا عليه وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the organizers, those that have attended, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant khair and afiyah to the entire Knoxville community, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a community of hidayah, guidance, ta'aleem, tafqih, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect it from all shurur and fitan. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.
just an announcement, mashallah, next month, Ustad Tarasa will be coming to Knoxville, he'll be coming November 18th. So inshallah, throughout the academic year, we're gonna have a scholar visit us each month. So inshallah, please look forward to those announcements on our WhatsApp group and benefit from the scholars that we'll be inviting, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan.